Hello everyone, welcome to the GA4 Getting Up to Speed webinar. Today we're going to be talking through GA4. First, why Google are performing the upgrade, as well as what are the new features as compared to Universal Analytics, and then digging into a couple of common pain points and issues people have had with the platform and how we can start to address them. Before we jump in, I'll just introduce you to myself. My name is Finbar. I am a data insights consultant here at Rio, and I have been working with Google Analytics and implementing it, analyzing it, and figuring out the different issues it might be having for about 8 years now. I have done that for all manner of different brands, from international brands like Soma to bigger retailers, and then even some finance and insurance companies, Bank of Ireland, eSure, and even a couple of government agencies mixed in there. All that is to say, I have probably encountered the problems that you are seeing before, and will be happy to help you solve them today. So, to start us off, why is this happening? Why is Google changing from Universal Analytics to GA4 as the only form of Google Analytics that will exist? The answer is two broad reasons. The first one is Universal Analytics was built before GDPR was the law of the land in Europe and did not have it in mind at the time. As such, several of the ways that Universal Analytics functions are actively in breach, and Google has been getting fined for the way it works. GA4 fixes several of those. It doesn't store IP addresses in the way that Universal Analytics used to, and also several of its more personalized features that target onto specific users are gated behind knowing appropriate consent signals, so that it can be confident it's only using those features on people who've agreed to it. The second reason is Universal Analytics was built to track website activity. A few years after they finished Universal Analytics, Google acquired a company called Firebase, who made a product to track apps and what users were doing on them. There were attempts to combine these two data models, but they didn't ever quite gel together because they were built in fundamentally different ways. GA4 redesigns the tracking model to bring those two things together, which means that you can have all of your different platforms all tracking into one neat, tidy location and able to analyze them in one go. However, not only is the change in Google Analytics about accommodating a new tracking model, it's also been a long time since 2005 when Universal Analytics first arrived on the scene. So, a lot of other things have changed alongside that. We have several features that work differently, and indeed a lot that have been upgraded or enhanced. First major change is the way that data is collected and categorized. In Universal Analytics, we captured all manner of different types of interactions with the site. We had page views were tracked as a thing called a page view. Clicks on different navigation elements were captured as events. E-commerce activity, transactions were all captured as a separate thing as well. The spread of categorization was useful for some purposes, but kind of got in the way of bringing the model together. So the next big change is in GA4, everything is captured as events. The events are the building block of your tracking. And in fact, if you go into your Google GA4, and navigate to the events name or events report, depending on what it's called in your interface. The list of events you see in there, that is what your tracking is built from. Everything else in the interface is built off the back of these. However, obviously, you can't just have something saying a page view happened and get all the information you want. So whenever an event is tracked, it collects alongside it a variety of different parameters. Parameters are the context, the extra bits and pieces. So for instance, the event called page_view, when it is sent off of the website, we also capture the URL of the page. So on this, we know that it was a page view of the homepage of the Rio Digital site. We also capture things like what browser someone's using, what kind of device they're on, and we can add extra parameters that we want to capture if we want to capture custom data alongside those. The next change, and one that's going to be very relevant to any marketers who are attending today, is the way in which we look at engagement inside of the platform. So the main engagement metric that Universal had access to was bounce rate. It worked out the percentage of sessions who didn't have a second bit of activity after the first page load on the site. However, all manner of different tracking configurations could cause problems with this and artificially inflate or lower your bounce rate. And it was a very common question was always asked of, what is a good bounce rate? The answer to which is very complicated. It's functionally, how long is a piece of string? To improve on this, GA4 has introduced the notion of an engaged session. So every visit to the site will have a little flag on it, and provided it meets one of these three criteria, if it lasts longer than 10 seconds, if it has a key event in the visit, most commonly a purchase, but maybe a completion of a request to quote form, or has at least 2 page views or screen views if you're looking at an app. As long as it meets one of those criteria, the session will count as engaged. Engagement rate is then the percentage of visits that are engaged, and bounce rate is the percentage of visits that are not, which is a new definition from compared to Universal Analytics. So if you have a different bounce rate in GA4 as you do in your Universal Analytics tracking, that is extremely expected and normal. They are counting different things. The advantage of this is that the engaged sessions and the engagement rate automatically build themselves around what you have told GA4 you think is important. Every time you tick an event to be a key event, a conversion that you're interested in and care about, the metrics automatically take that into account and calculate around it. So what is a good engagement rate is still tailored to your site, but it is automatically building itself around your site. And so when you see an improvement in engagement rate, you can be confident that is because the right things are happening. One of the other major ways in which GA4 processes its data differently from Universal Analytics is in its new focus on users. Universal Analytics focused its reports and structure around understanding and interpreting sessions, that is to say, a visit to the website. What marketing effort drove that to the site, and then whether or not it resulted in a conversion, whether that conversion be a purchase or a sign up to a form. GA4 is built from the jump to focus its analysis on users and to try and understand their entire interaction with the platform and how they behave across their entire lifetime with you. This new focus has led to several new reports and features being available to you inside of GA4. First of all, the first user touchpoints has been added to GA4 as a standardized report available in the interface, which will show you for each of your marketing channels or any other way you'd like to break your marketing down, how many users did this first introduce to the website, and then how do those users interact with the site across their many, many sessions after that, or indeed, did it not get them to return after the fact? The next part is the notion of active users. In Universal Analytics, when you saw the users metric, what that meant is how many distinct cookie IDs have we seen on the site recently. In GA4, when you see the phrase users, what this actually informing you about is the number of active users of the site. In the time frame you're analyzing, active users is all of the users who had their very first visit in that time frame, plus for all of your returning users, they only get counted if they had an engaged session in that time frame. This new metric gives us a better idea of how well we are doing, what size of audience is actually engaging with our site or app at any given time. The final piece is user ID. User ID was a feature available in Universal Analytics, but it was a later introduction. In GA4, it's been built with this feature in mind. The user ID is how we can recognize somebody across all of their different devices as long as they log in. This improves on the problem we had in Universal Analytics, where a user who accesses the site on their desktop versus looks at it on their phone is going to be recognized as two entirely distinct people, despite the fact they are the same person and they are researching the same products and the same things across those two visits. By taking advantage of user ID, we can stitch all of those sessions together and get a better understanding of everything that a user is doing on the site. And the last thing to mention is the introduction of machine learning features into GA4. Since Universal Analytics was first released to the world and back in 2005, Google have expanded and improved on their machine learning knowledge and features a great deal. We could fill an entire webinar with a discussion of these new features, so I'm just going to give a very quick summary, but if you are interested, there will be a PDF available for you to download after this session with a longer description on each of these, as well as some of the restrictions that you need to meet to make them available to you. But these features include the ability to model behavior for users who have opted out of being tracked by cookies, predictive metrics, which helps you find people who are likely to convert, and you can flag those people into marketing audiences to target them with ads. And finally, a data-driven attribution model that is available to all GA4 users, not just the premium users as it was back in Universal Analytics, so you can properly model the contribution of all of your different marketing efforts. So that's why this upgrade is happening. That's what's new in GA4. However, what about actually using it? I'm now going to take you through 5 of the most common pain points and issues that we've seen in the platform, give you the tools for how to figure out if you have this issue, and also how you can start to address it. The first difficulty that we regularly encounter is people not knowing what is in their GA4, not being confident in the data because they think it has gaps, or not being able to understand it because they don't have documentation available. To resolve this, the first thing we have to do is figure out what you have. As I mentioned earlier, events are the building blocks of GA4 tracking. So the first step is to go into your events section and start looking through them, and figuring out what is here. In the admin panel of GA4, there is a specific events area that will list every event GA4 has seen and how much it's seeing of it in recent weeks and months. Once you've got the list of things actually being tracked into GA4, we can start breaking them down. The first group is the events you should absolutely expect to be seeing in GA4. These 4 events here, page view, user engagement, session start, and first visit, are all mandatory pieces of tracking. If you put the script on GA4, you should see all of these. If any of them are missing, that is going to cause problems in the rest of your reporting. If they are missing, the way that we can look into addressing that is in how your GA4 has been implemented onto the site. Whether that be hard coding via Tag Manager, whatever it might be, you will have to go back to the drawing board, figure out its deployment. Alternatively, you can turn to an agency partner like Rio, who will be able to assist in that. Once you've confirmed that you do have these, the next step is this list of what is called enhanced measurement. These are pieces of tracking that you can enable by just ticking a box inside of the GA4 interface, and it will begin tracking these interactions with your page. They come in very specific naming conventions with extremely specific extra data they gather alongside. For instance, the scroll tracking only captures when somebody hits the 90% of the page has been seen. But it can start to explain to you what the different events you have available are and which of these you've enabled in this way. You can find which of these you have enabled by going into the admin panel, clicking on the menu item called Data Streams, and then in the submenus inside there, you'll be able to see which you've clicked on. Any event you can see in your interface that I haven't already mentioned has been set up as a custom event somewhere. Most common way is via a tag management system like Google Tag Manager, but you may be also running it out of a third-party integration like Shopify. And the only way to figure out what these events are actually telling you, what is causing them to appear on site, is to go into your tag manager or the documentation for your third-party tool and begin auditing, which is going through them one by one and figuring out what causes it to trigger, when it fires, and what additional information it brings with it that you can use to split the data up and interpret it better. Once again, this can be a very manual process, but again, partner agencies like ourselves here at Rio are very experienced at doing this. And one of the useful things that we can do for you is when we're going through this GTM for you, we can use that to build out documentation. So if you don't currently have a document telling you what events you have, we can go through and precisely pull out the specific conditions that are causing what data you can see to appear in GA4 so that you will have a nice clean document to share around your analytics team. The second pain point I want to go over is that even once you have good, accurate data coming in, you know what it is, you know what it means, GA4 has a whole new interface for you to navigate. And this interface I have found in the past it to be just similar enough to Universal Analytics that if you have experience, you feel like you should be able to immediately jump in and start using it, but in actuality works just differently enough to be very confusing and frustrating. In addition, when you set up a brand new GA4 property, and it generates a set of standard reports for you. That list can often be poorly organized, have duplicate reports doing the same things, and potentially even is missing certain reports that you were used to having back in your old analytics version. So we solve this in two parts. First, just give you a very quick visual. The first part, I'll just show you the kinds of reports you can see inside of GA4. There are two main formats of report. The first is these overview reports, and they do roughly what they say on the tin. They give you an overview of how your platform is performing around a certain theme of data. So on screen you can see the acquisition overview for the Google Merchandise Store. It's giving a quick bird's eye tour of how many people are getting to the site, what marketing efforts are driving them, and so on. Each of these cards serves two purposes. One, it gives you a quick little hit of information that is important, more often for quick diagnostics, is everything working correctly, than any complicated question answering. But two, they will come with a little blue button at the bottom of each card that if you click will take you to a report that will give you a more specific breakdown. Our second kind of report is these detailed reports. Everything that isn't an overview is a detailed report, and they look like this. They will have a few charts at the top and then a table down below that will break one dimension or field down by a variety of different metrics. So in this particular case, the field we are breaking down is the page path. So the page that somebody is on your website, and we can see all of the different metrics related to it, including how many times it has been seen, how many users have seen this page, if that's different, how long people are engaging with the page when they actually encounter it. Detail reports tend to be the ones you are starting with when you have an actual analysis question to ask of GA4. They will let you drill into the details of how something is behaving or performing. So hopefully that gives you a start on what is contained in each of the reports, what they're built to do. You can start mapping your detail reports based on what the primary dimension is and which ones are going to be useful to you in particular. However, the second part is resolving what reports do I have available to me? Are they able to answer all my questions? And resolving that issue can be a little bit more involved. We have three ways to approach the issue of the available reporting. First of all, the standard report section, that menu that you first encounter when you open up GA4, is entirely customizable for your property. You can rebuild each individual report, what dimensions and metrics are available in it. You can also rebuild the structure of the menu, the naming conventions, and even create entirely new ones. If you know that you are running an awful lot of Google Ads activity, a lot of paid search advertising, you can build reports that are always going to focus specifically on Google Ads activity so that you can open it directly and immediately start reporting on that because it's going to be important. Similarly, if you want to be able to split certain parts of your website out from each other and analyze your shopping content over in one place, product pages and lists and the like, versus blog content that's more about social engagement and doing brand awareness, you can separate those reports out and build them with separate conversion goals. First of all, there is a tool called the library feature. This lets us customize and rebuild the standard reporting menu that we are presented with when we create a new GA4. These will be shared amongst every person who accesses your GA4, so you can use this to rebuild that menu precisely to the needs of your team, whether that be splitting out your marketing reports to specifically focus on Google Ads in one place and email traffic in another, because that's going to be very useful, or parceling out what site data goes into what reports, so that you have reports that specifically look at your blog content so you can measure the successes of that as brand awareness versus your shopping content, how good are we at getting people to purchase products, making it much easier for your team to dive in, find the data they need quickly and efficiently. However, that does have a limit. The reports features of GA4, these standard pre-built ones, aren't able to do more complicated filtering or session segmenting in GA4. If we want to use those kinds of features to analyze all sessions who encountered a particular page or triggered a certain event or bucketed into certain A/B tests, we have to use the exploration section. This lets any of your GA4 users build their own reports and drill into the data using more complicated tools, including segmentation, building out custom funnels so that we can see how users progress across important steps, and starting to look at how different audiences overlap with one another. Final tool available to us is if the question you are trying to ask is too complicated or the data model doesn't support you in the way that you want to ask it, BigQuery is Google's cloud computing program where we can upload our GA data and interrogate it in much more detail than we are able to inside of the platform itself. The upload link between Google Analytics and BigQuery used to only be available to paid customers of Google Analytics. However, with GA4, it is available to free users as well. However, you do have to pay for the tool. It is not particularly expensive, and if you are asking complicated questions, I have found it is almost always worth it. For a third pain point, we are looking in the traffic acquisition reports. What marketing is driving visits to the website? And the issue we very commonly see is an extremely high portion of unassigned visits. This unassigned channel is the group of all visits who, when they arrive on the site, the marketing that they claim to be driven by isn't matching any of our channels. The reason this is a problem is that all of these sessions, all these visits to the site, whatever activity they got up to, whatever conversions and revenue they drove, none of it is being properly allocated and credited to the marketing channels that drove it. So if you have a whole variety of email traffic lumped in here, your email channel is going to look a lot worse because none of the email traffic is inside the report. The causes of this problem, it can have two subtypes, each with their own specific methods of resolving. The first one is quite straightforward. If, when you look at your unassigned traffic and you look at the source mediums that drove it, you see lots of named, labeled things. So here we can see we've got ebook/PDF, ebooks, PDF ebook, pocket save, so on and so on and so on. This means that all of these sessions have marketing information. It's just there isn't a channel grouping rule that's catching it. And this can be very quickly solved by going into your admin section, going into your channel configuration section, and building a channel grouping that accounts for it. As I see on the screen, I have whipped up a quick example for one that would catch any ebook source marketing. We can add rules to create whole new channels, or we can add a little extra rule onto a channel that already exists to bucket traffic in there. The advantage of changing channel grouping rules is that those updates are retroactive. So as soon as you update it, all of your historic data is going to be rebucketed into the right places, and you're going to be able to use that almost instantly to start doing your analysis. So this is very quick to solve, quick to put in a new version, and if anything does go wrong, very quick to roll back and try something new without any long-term consequences. If when you split your unassigned traffic by the source medium, rather than getting lots of names and labels, you instead see the value not set in brackets, this problem is a lot harder to deal with. This is caused by events being sent to your site that claims it has no marketing information, and also it is not connected to any other session or user that has marketing information. They then end up creating their own sessions off the back of those, entirely disconnected from anything else that's going on the site, and we have no way to recombine it with other visits, or indeed understand what marketing actually pushed this through. This causes us several large problems. First of all of these little extra events create their own brand new sessions and users, which can dramatically inflate those metrics. We end up with a much higher user and session count inside of GA4 than is actually true. It can also extremely skew your marketing credit. So if somebody arrived on the website by a paid search ad and they went through the journey on your site, found a product page, added to basket, purchased it, if for some reason it was the purchase event that had this issue, that's going to be in an entirely distinct session, and none of that credit will ever be attributable to the paid search channel, because it will not have been in the same session and not even by the same user. If for whatever reason that this event didn't have marketing information attached to it, if it also doesn't bring through the way to identify this particular user, we will never be able to connect it up to the rest of the visits this user might have on the site, which means we'll inflate our users. We won't be able to properly map people's activity across the website, and if you want to know what the last interaction a user had with the site was, that'll be an impossible question to answer because we'll never be able to say for certain whether it was actually this page was the thing that drove them away, or if that's just the last thing we're able to identify about them. Fixing this problem, while unfortunately challenging, as the documentation on this issue and what causes it is somewhat in progress from Google. However, over several clients have experienced it, we've been able to map several best practices that we can adopt that will help you minimize or even entirely eliminate it in your GA4. First important part is making sure that you have correct tracking coverage on every page. To work correctly, GA4 needs to have its configuration of tag push, and then the rest of the event tracking begins. We need to make sure that that is set up consistently and accurately everywhere on your site. The second best practice is all about timing. We need to make sure that the order in which GA4 tracking executes is consistent everywhere on the website, even on pages that behave very differently from one another and maybe use different tools to create them. For instance, standard pages, checkout steps, and the order confirmation page often behave quite differently, and you will need to force them to track consistently using your tag manager. The final piece is around cookies. Depending on your cookie consent tool, tracking might end up being blocked at different times or available at other points, depending on when the user's consent state is made available to us in Google Tag Manager and to your tracking. Tracking needs to be designed around your consent tool to make sure that it is executing at the right times. This is also complicated by the introduction of consent mode, which is Google's way of interpreting what a cookie consent tool is telling it. We need to make sure that we send tracking around that push as well. By following all three of these best practices, so far has eliminated a large proportion of the not set unassigned issue that we have seen across many of our clients. And we are able to repeat and implement these best practices for you. For our fourth commonly asked question, I want to talk about consent mode and specifically explain what it is and if you need it, as I'm regularly getting asked that question in the last few months. Consent mode as a feature is how Google interprets what your user base have actually opted into to be tracked over. That is then applied into quite different ways across the platforms. Feature gating is the idea that Google Analytics and much more importantly, Google Ads need to see consent flags to let you use them. That means that there are certain audience tools that you previously would have had access to in Google Ads that will no longer be available to you if you are not actively sending, we have a cookie consent tool, it opts people out when they join, and this person chose to be opted in. They have allowed us to use their marketing information. Only once Google Ads has seen that will they let you go, you can create these kinds of audiences now. Implementing consent mode on your site is how you give the green flag to Google to let you do that. You may have seen error messages and warnings throughout the Google platforms telling you that you do not have this. On the question of whether you need it, if you have Google Ads, absolutely, you should just set this up. If you don't, or you don't use those features, you don't technically need it. However, my advice is just to implement it now as a best practice so that if a feature appears that requires these flags, or indeed you decide to start using these features in these platforms, you will already be prepared. Making these changes is something that has to be done usually inside your tag manager, like Google Tag Manager. And again, either your internal owner of that or an agency like Rio can support with that. The second feature that consent mode is linked to and regularly referred to as is about modeling the behavior of your users who opt out of tracking. That is to say, it is Google's best attempt to answer the question, but how many people decline cookies? The idea is that we are able to capture data about people who've opted out, where we can identify that as opted out data, and it is stored separately, analyzed separately, and then brought together to create an estimate of your overall traffic. There is more detail about this in the exact way the feature works in the PDF that you can pick up after this webinar ends. However, important question here is, do you need it? My answer is no, and in some cases you maybe shouldn't activate it. For one thing, This data is an estimate, but it is combined with your actual properly, accurately measured data, which means that you lose a degree of accuracy in knowing exactly what's happening on your site. In addition, depending on which part of Europe your business is active in, each country has implemented GDPR in slightly different ways, and there are question marks over whether this idea of tracking users who've explicitly opted out, even when we're not gathering cookie information about them, is not in breach of some countries' interpretations of GDPR, most importantly, the UK's, if you're, for me at least. If you do choose to go ahead with this tool, a thing we would often recommend is creating 2 separate GA4 properties, one of which you send this information to and one of which you do not use this. Because in case something goes wrong with the way that it models this data, you'll have a totally clean, unestimated data set to rely on. The final pain point, question that we are often asked is, how do we take our data, once we know it's accurate and correct, proper representative coverage of what people can do on our site, how do we take that and start using it to drive decisions, to optimize and improve the way a business functions? That is a very large topic to cover. However, there are some easy places to start. The first is connecting your dataset up to other Google marketing platforms. I will use Google Ads as my main example, but if you use any of the platforms connected to Campaign Manager, this also applies there. Setting up these links is easy, and you can just go into your admin section in GA4, check the product links bit to see if you have already enabled it. If not, strongly recommend getting that set up. Once we have data and we have the product link set up between Analytics and Google Ads, what we can do is build out audiences. Some audiences are very straightforward. For instance, as soon as you set the link up, an automatic audience will be generated called purchases, which is everyone who has ever triggered a purchase event, so that you can easily target ads towards people who've previously bought products to show them new things. However, we can start to build more varied and interesting audiences to further optimize that targeting. On your screen, you'll see I have built out an audience that will find me all of the users who, in the time frame I'm looking at, have added a product to their bag but have not had a purchase event go. Once created, this audience will automatically sync to Google Ads, and we could use it to target a campaign at people who clearly have shown interest in our products but haven't yet purchased something, reminding them to come back and finish off their journey. Google Ads can also create lookalike audiences based off of this, so it can find people who share common traits with the members of this audience that already exist out in the rest of the world. You can see a list of all audiences you currently have built by going into your admin section and going to the audiences menu, and it will look like this. I'll show you the names, the descriptions, and then how many users are found in each of them currently. As mentioned, all of these will automatically sync to Google Ads, and we can use them to target campaigns to those specific people, or indeed use them to block certain campaigns. So if we identify a group of people who perform very poorly on the site, we can block them from being targeted by our Google Ads campaigns, making sure our spend is spent on people who are more likely to convert. The last thing to mention is you will see a few of these audiences have a little wand icon next to them. These are being automatically generated by Google and are again related to machine learning features, specifically the predictive metrics and audiences one, where Google is identifying people it thinks are likely to buy. Again, the details can be found in the PDF you can pick up after this session is ended. Making good use of your data to create audiences, identify well-performing groups, and sharing that to your marketing platforms is a very easy way with data you are not paying for and is being handed over to you to start improving and optimizing the way your marketing works and making sure that your spend is more efficient. Those are some of the most common pain points we have seen users having with GA4, and hopefully if you are experiencing some of those, this gives you a starting point to try and resolve them. However, if you have already reached the end of the suggestions we've had here, or indeed have a problem that we didn't have time to address today, there is much more we can do to support and help with that. Rio Digital has a variety of analytics services that we can offer. We start with every engagement with analytics with an audit. We will go through your data set, your GA4, your tag setup, your site itself, and we'll be able to tell you how accurate your data is. Do you have tracking on all of the things you want? Are those properly recording every time it happens, whether that be add to bags or purchases? Whether your tracking is compliant with GDPR and Google's terms of service, and how you can potentially address and fix if it isn't. And lastly, we will also be able to tell you if there are features that you are able to make use of in the platform that you're currently not doing so, and where opportunities that you might not be aware of exist. With that audit step completed, we can move towards the kind of core services the analytics team offers. Implementation is about setting up tracking, whether that be on a brand new site, you're adding a new section, or you've had someone come in and build a bit of a GA4, but it needs finishing off, there's missing data, to lastly, if you have an existing site, but you are migrating it from one tech stack to another. Any of those we can support on. If you have data that you're happy with and are making use of, we can come into support on analysis, digging into the data to find the problems that are there, and helping you to identify new opportunities or build out audiences to send to other marketing tools. On the platform configuration front, everything I mentioned about building new reports, designing customer exploration reports and funnels, as well as exporting data out to data visualization tools like Looker Studio, or indeed to BigQuery and then onwards to a visualization tool. We can support with any of those to make sure that GA4 is working for your team in the way it should be. And lastly, we can offer GA4 training sessions so that if you have a working GA4, your team can cut the learning curve to start making use of it. And there will be no interruption of service where for the first month after Universal Analytics goes away, as everyone is struggling to get GA4 to produce the same numbers as they used to be able to get Universal Analytics to. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this has been interesting and useful. I will be available in the chat for the next 10-15 minutes to answer questions. So please, if you have one, hang around, send me a message, and I'll get back to you as quick as I can. Thank you so very much. Have a lovely day.